What is up, you guys? It is me again. So I'm going to tell you guys um a an eye-opening thing video. A lot of people don't realize this about God, but it makes a lot of sense when it's put into words. You just think about it, you just, as passing thought, God can do anything. Nothing's impossible for God. You just have that as a thought, and then it just goes away because we know that He's God and He's capable of everything. But when you really sit down to think about that, like, is there something that God cannot do? Is there really something that's impossible for God to do? Like, the scriptures mention that with God everything is possible, but there are still things that are impossible for God. And I'm going to explain them here. So, yes, there are, when we sit down and think, like, God is God, or when we have the passing thought that says is God is God, and there's nothing that God can't do. God is infinitely powerful, and His powers have no limit. That is true. It is true. God is infinitely powerful. There is no limitations to His power. However, there are a couple things that God cannot do, and that are impossible for God to do. And I'm going to mention them here. Number one is sin. God is infinitely holy. He hates sin. God cannot possibly commit any act of evil. Anything that God does, every single thing, action of God's, and thought or whatnot, is infinitely holy and perfect. God cannot do anything, anything whatsoever that's evil or imperfect. He cannot do anything whatsoever that's sinful or imperfect. He's not capable of committing sin. That's why Jesus on earth didn't commit any sin whatsoever, even when he was tempted to, because he was God in human flesh. And as such, he couldn't sin. It's not possible for God to sin, and he's the only one out of every single human being who's ever lived that lived a sinless life. Number two, God cannot go back on His word. He can't change His mind about the Bible. He can't go, His words are eternal. His words are eternal. He can't go back on His words. He can't go back on His promises to us. When He says He'll do something, He'll do something. If He breaks a promise, that's a lie. The devil promises us stuff to do something, but then he goes back on his word. He breaks those promises. They're empty promises. They're promises of lies. They're fake promises that the devil uses. The devil gives to us. The devil says, okay, yeah, I promise that your loved one will live, but, and then they don't. And that the devil knows that you're in a very desperate spot when a loved one of yours is dying, and he tells you that he gives you false hope. Says hope that's saying to you, like, oh, they're going to make it through. They're going to make it through. They're going to make it through. And then when they die, you're filled with rage and everything. That was the devil giving you that false hope. But God will give you the sincerity to let you know that the person will pass, but for you to prepare yourself and to spend time with them in their final hours, preaching them the gospel, how to be saved if they're not saved already, and the whole, God cannot get a person out of hell. Once a person is sentenced to hell, God cannot get a person out of hell. God's final judgment for the wicked is final and just and righteous and holy, and perfect. But He cannot get a person out of hell. once a person, yeah, of course there's cases here and there where people die and have near death experiences, but and they see hell, they enter hell, but God gives them a glimpse of that place, but then he pulls them out and he gives them a second chance on earth. That's very rare, very, very rare. How many people are in the world right now? Around 8.5 billion people in the world right now. Yet, yeah, sure, millions of people have gotten that chance from God. Maybe not even millions, but a lot of people have gotten that chance from God to see hell and then give them a second chance, to preach about it and get saved and whatnot. But if you're on your deathbed and you're waiting to get on your deathbed to where you see hell and then being pulled out of the darkness and back into your body so you can accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you're not going to. If it's God's righteous plan for you, then yeah, sure, but don't accept Jesus Christ today. Don't wait until you're almost dead or whatnot and slip out of your body and have a near-death experience and then call upon Jesus, because that only happens to a very few people, So, I mean, you're messing around with eternity, the most horrific, painful place that you can ever even imagine. You're risking being there forever. Don't 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 get saved when you're literally dying. Get saved now, because you're at severe risk you're at severe risk of entering into hell for eternity when you're dying, and get saved. So today's the day of salvation. We're not promised tomorrow. Do I know 100% that I'm going to make it through the night, or will I die in my sleep? I promise you right now 100% that I would be lying if I told you that 100% I'll be here tomorrow. I will promise you 99%, but not the full 100. I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure. I could die in my sleep. So you could die out of unknown circumstances. When it's your time, it's your time. You could just die. We're on a time limit. God is, of course, keeping track of that time until we die, but we don't know when that is. I could have another 3 years left to live. I could have another 20 years left to live. What the rapture most likely is going to happen before 2028. So anywhere between now and then, I could die. I just don't know. Do I think I'm going to die by 2028? Of course not. Everybody thinks that, right? But then the next day, they're in hell, and they thought they had another 50 years left until they died, and that they could be saved in the next 30 years or whatnot. But they died unexpectedly. Of course, death will come at an hour you do not expect. So those are 3 things that God cannot do, and that is impossible for God to do. Yes, when you have the passing thought that God is God, he could do anything. Nothing is possible for God. His power is limitless. That makes sense. But when you really sit down and think about this stuff that I mentioned, you're just sitting down listening to this right now, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, God can't sin. He's infinitely perfect. He's not evil in any way. He can't possibly, even if he wanted to, commit any act of evil whatsoever. Everything that God does, every action, thought, motive, whatever, is perfect, righteous, and holy, and loving. He can't do anything that goes against his character. Infinitely holy, loving, righteous, just. So, hope you guys enjoy.